Hey, welcome back to Late Edition Crime Beat Chronicles, a Lee Enterprises podcast. I'm your host, Nat Cardona. On this podcast, you'll hear true crime stories as told by journalists from regional newspapers across the country. For the next series of episodes, we'll be diving into the 1990 cold case murder of Susan Negersmith in Wildwood, New Jersey. You'll hear from reporters, past and present, who covered the case as it's unfolded throughout the years and the many twists and turns along the way. If you missed episode 1 of the Susan Negersmith case, please go back and give it a listen to get yourself caught up. And now, here's the rest of my interview with Yvette Craig, who covered this case as a young reporter at the Press of Atlantic City back in the early 1990s. So what was the timing between you kind of having that light bulb of follow the money to figure out what's going on here to getting that manila envelope?
It was within a 24, 48-hour period.
Okay. And then soon after finding out about her death, or is this a long time removed?
Shortly after, right as it was still hot off the presses.
Okay. Right. You've got all this plethora of information. Mm-hmm. Were you kind of looking around your cubicle should I show this to someone? I mean, did you have to bring it to your editor right away? I mean, what was that like?
Well, for me, because I was so new, I wanted to make sure what I was looking at was legit, right? If I recall, I think I took it home first and looked through it, made lots of notes, and went in wide-eyed to my city editor and said, we got a really good story here. I did share what was whispered to me. And so, of course, we have to be careful about what we say and don't say. Everything has to be factual. So if the police are telling us one thing, but what we're looking at is different, let's just tell our readers what it is that we see. I knew this was going to be something big. And then I would say probably by day 3, I received a call back from Susan's father, Mr. Kent Negersmith. And the angst in his voice touched me so that he was able to share with me more about his daughter. It's easy for a parent to say, oh, my child would never, right? But he knew his daughter. He sometimes you just know that you know that you know. And I picked up on that with him. And so between working with him, this anonymous, envelope of wealth of information, it became my mission to get her death certificate changed, or her cause of death changed from accidental to homicide. It became my mission, and it was tough. And then one of the things that we've never reported because we didn't have proof, I'm going to tell you this is what was going on. So this is the truth. In fact, that this is what's said. Within about 2 weeks or so, other sources came to me to tell me that it was a police officer that did this to Susan Negersmith. And that was the reason for the cover-up. And they wanted to not only protect the tourism dollars and the whole economy during that time, but part of the reason I was getting so much pushback was because the rumor had it that it was a police officer that had raped her. I must tell you, I have never, ever, ever been able to prove that.
Right. I mean, I was going to say, so you get handed this tip per se. How do you go forward? How do you proceed to get to talk to the right people to figure things out? I mean,
I went right to the chief and said, I'm hearing this. So, and of course, everything was denied. And then, right. DA and everything. So I was never shy about asking those kinds of questions, but I wanted proof. I don't like to just go off of rumors or hearsay or even a source. So if two sources said it, which I believe that might have been the case at that time, then that was enough for me to at least go to the chief and go to the DA and say, look, I'm hearing this, And I want to say that the Mr. Negersmith had his own attorney as well, and what do you call it, investigator. He had his own like family investigator. And I want to say that they kind of heard something similar. So when I heard the arrest of this recent person, you know, while I was so happy that there is appearing to be somewhat of some conclusion, you know, that's still in my head, wondering. Yeah,
it's like a nagging thing.
It's extremely nagging, and you know, it's one of those cases that sticks with you, right? Because you want justice for her, you want justice for the family, and so dollars should not interfere with justice, you know.
Just so many years removed. It's and that's actually something I want to touch on with you is that, you know, you report on her a day after she's identified, and then your articles get more spaced out, but you were following it. It was like any little thing you were covering it, but then it's a year out, you know, 2 years out, that kind of thing, and how different elements of the case were evolving. Something I wanted to touch on is there's a summer of 91 article that you wrote, and this gentleman, Thomas Wolfe, came up in the investigation. And these are the early days of DNA. And you had to write about, you know, they're going to be collecting his DNA to process it to see if there's any connection here. Did you have to educate yourself on DNA? I mean, did you have to talk to somebody about that? Because it was so new that it wasn't necessarily the most, you know, in the lingo of the day kind of thing. So you're sharing it to people, you know, you're writing it and it's going to be disseminated through the public. Did you have to do any research as far as like, what is this thing?
Yeah, I think so. Of course, back then we didn't have Google. We didn't yeah, this thing called Google. We didn't have that back then. I think if I recall, I talked to some police detectives about it. And then I also talked to, I think, a criminologist at one of the universities there about, you know, what does this mean? How does it, and there was just, when I tell you the pictures, she had bloody fingerprints, if I recall, like on her, I want to say it was like her upper arm. And I remember thinking to myself, why can't they just lift those prints, those bloody prints? And then when I tell you, you know, about the blood under her nails and that torn nail, I remember being frustrated thinking, why can't they just take whatever that DNA is right there and test it, you know, however they do what they do back then. So yes, and it helped ignite that thirst for wanting to get to the answer, right, of how this poor young lady perished. But it just seemed like I would just get so far and then, you know, hit another roadblock.
Which the one article that really popped out at me was late November 92 article where you talked to both Kent Negersmith, and I believe you talked either through him to the Maryland medical examiner, where that medical examiner was saying, hey, this should really be ruled a homicide in my personal expertise. I know it wasn't you personally that came to that conclusion because he's the expert and came to that conclusion himself. But this was your article. This is what you went with. How did it feel to be able to have an expert put on paper something that will be published to the community with that personal take on what happened to Susan Negersmith?
It was very rewarding, obviously, right? I didn't feel when, you know, I really grew as a reporter with this article, right? Everything that I had learned about going back to having just that address and all the digging that we had to do, right? You know, here I had these documentations and words that were written and the pictures. It's the pictures that haunt me. But it felt like a victory for Susan and her family when we finally had someone back it, because, you know, it was extremely frustrating that the local law enforcement weren't budging, you know. And so it was a bit of a relief. And it was a victory, but it still wasn't enough. It just still wasn't enough for me, because by this time I'm so emotionally attached to it, but still in a professional way, right? But when you get so emotionally attached, you want to you want to see it over with, so that the family could have closure. I mean, luckily they had her. They were able to bury her body and eulogize her and things. But how do you have closure when you know the person that did this to your daughter is still out there, and this the thought that they could possibly do it to someone else, or maybe had done it to someone else, right? So and those were my shared feelings as well.
We need to take a quick break, so don't go too far.
An important message from Blue Ridge Hospice. There may be several hospices now claiming to serve the area, but Blue Ridge Hospice is the only local hospice that has been serving here for 40 plus years, operates the only hospice inpatient care center, conducts the only community-wide grief and bereavement programs, offers a nationally recognized music therapy program in conjunction with Shenandoah University, outscores every other Virginia hospice in Medicare's quality scores, and so much more. Blue Ridge Hospice, the first, the best. Find out more at blueridgehospice.org.
From a professional standpoint, you didn't get the closure, the bookend to your writing, and that's what journalists are. We're storytellers, right?
I think for me, I became a journalist because I wanted to make a difference, you know, and I use my words and my pen, whatever, to help make those differences. So if it helps get a killer off the street, that's what my job is about, right? To protect the next young victim that might be out partying Memorial Day weekend at the start of this, you know, a summer season.
Well, tell me about that. When did you leave Atlantic City?
5 years. I got recruited by the Fort Worth Star-Telegram in Texas. So it was very hard, although the Press of Atlantic City had their own investigative team. And so I had to turn all my information over to them. And they had the hours and the bandwidth to really delve deep into it. It was very hard to let go. It was very hard to let go. So of course I kept up with the coverage over the years.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Is you leave and then so much time goes on. It's were you keeping tabs on it?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I don't know what would prompt it. I don't know if there would be, I don't know if it'd be the time of the season, or if I see something about the shore or something, and immediately my brain went to Susan.
Have you experienced any other stories, things that you've had to cover like that, like things that kind of stick with you, things that nag at you, that are still having question marks, that have followed you throughout your career? Anything?
This is the one. It's definitely the one. I've seen things that, you know, that would haunt me, you know, maybe for a month or two. The number of women who are just brutalized by the men that they trust, and, you know, being set on fire and surviving, and just the, you know, the gang violence. I got to hang out with the gang unit out in Fort Worth, and just seeing the aftermath of some of those things. Those are the kinds of things that they haunt me. If I had to do it all over again, I would. Good. There's something like words, you know, and I consider myself someone that is, you know, a voice for the voiceless. I mean, as cliche as it sounds, it's true. It's very true.
Cliches are cliches, and they're because they work, and they're right. Yeah.
Right.
There's truth to them.
Yeah. So we still don't have closure, though. They do have a man in custody.
I know. I was talking to Bill Barlow about that, and it's really, It's in a holding pattern, and I don't know if the family is really going to get any resolution or justice like in the courts. Man, it just sucks when a case goes on this long, and there's so many cases like it that just years, decades go by and not a whole lot of change. It's just, it's something.
The other thing that's sad is knowing that Mr. Negersmith has passed on without seeing the justice that he fought so hard for.
Yeah.
But isn't there some solace in knowing he's back with his beautiful daughter, right? There's some peace in knowing that he's not suffering behind that. But as a journalist, yes, but as a journalist, you want that closure.
Closure on both ends.
Yes.
I get it. Yeah. So any parting shots before I let you free here?
I wish I had studied some more on DNA. I am fascinated by just new technology that helps with crime solving. That is something that it's not part of what I'm doing now, but if I did it, if that was something I had time to look into, because there's 3D imaging now. There's artificial intelligence. There's just so many different things. I'm just wondering, as someone who's covered crime probably easily for 20-something years, I would love to see how all that helps with solving cases a lot faster.
Right. It's got to be pretty crazy for you to see from the start of your career with writing those kind of stories till now. I mean, the evolution of technology in regard to DNA and all that, it is mind-boggling to me, and I haven't even seen half of it.
I hope that, there are crime reporters that are out there that still realize that the people that the stories that they're writing about, that they are people, they're not just another number. And I think that it's so easy to kind of get caught up in that, oh, it's just another school shooting, or it's just no, it's not. These are communities, these are lives, these are families that are just being torn apart. And I just really pray that those journalists that are out there on the ground reporting these killings and these crimes, that they remember that human element. And that's something that I always try to do in my writing. So
thanks for saying that. That is a really important parting shot. In the handful of years that Yvette covered the case, there was a consistent back and forth between Susan's family and the law enforcement agencies in charge of her case. Her parents always felt that the 20-year-old was murdered, while investigators wouldn't budge on reopening the case, and the local medical examiner's office was satisfied with the original autopsy. Then, in June of 1991, there was some hope for Susan's case. A man named Thomas Wolfe was believed to have been with Susan the night before her body was found. He submitted a blood sample to the state and was behind bars in the Atlantic City County Jail on a different murder charge. However, in the end, blood test results and DNA results did not match any of the fluids found on Susan's body. But then, finally, Susan Negersmith's death was ruled a homicide. Here are a couple of excerpts from the July 23rd, 1993 article headlined, "Wildwood Death of Susan Negersmith Ruled a Homicide." 3 years after her death, state officials now say that 20-year-old Susan Negersmith was raped, beaten, and smothered. Susan Negersmith was murdered 3 years ago, just as her father lobbied so long to prove, and authorities are on the hunt for the person who did it, Attorney General Robert J. Del Tufo said on Friday. Negersmith died in a dirty alleyway. Her battered, bloodied, and partially clothed body was dragged out of view of passerbys behind a Wildwood restaurant Memorial Day weekend of 1990. Nevertheless, shortly after her death, authorities determined that Negersmith was the victim of an accident, refusing to budge on their decision. The state's turnaround was due in large measure to the findings of Dr. Michael Baden, a former New York State pathologist hired by New Jersey to review the case. Dr. Baden has determined that Miss Negersmith was the victim of a sexual assault, the statement said. He has also ruled out an accidental death as the likely cause of death. Ms. Negersmith's death is entirely consistent with mechanical asphyxiation. A spokesman for the Attorney General's office refused to elaborate on the term mechanical asphyxiation, attributing it to neither strangulation nor suffocation. The reclassification is the result of authorities reviewing all evidence, including re-interviewing a number of persons, a review of a series of polygraph tests, ordering new forensic tests, including DNA and other scientific testing, and enlisting the assistance of Baden to review the case. That's it for now. Keep an ear out for the next episode in the Susan Negersmith case. If you like what we do here at Late Edition Crime Beat Chronicles, please be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you soon.